once we determine what's going on in Pennsylvania or not, then you need to look at two other states which are also in the Eastern time zone, and that's North Carolina and Georgia. If Kamala Harris or Trump win both those states, we're in for a pretty interesting night. So I would look at those two states.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Solutions, the leading iGaming PAM platform with a modular approach, including many benefits like a fast, secure, and scalable API-based platform, integrated with all major third-party products and services. Make sure you head over to Pragmatic Solutions and join our smart thinking.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Play, a leading game developer providing player favorites to the most successful brands across the industry. With an award-winning multi-product portfolio of slots, live casino, bingo, virtual sports, and more, Pragmatic Play is powering up new possibilities of play through one single API. Visit pragmaticplay.com and discover your favorite every time.
Bingo, bango, bongo. We are live here at the Next.io podcast with a legend of the industry today, BP3. How are you doing, my friend?
Good, Pierre. It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure to speak to you, my friend. And we have the US election looming in a couple of days at the time of this recording, of course. And something that that I've been certainly very interested in over the last 20 years, I think, as a European looking into the political landscape in North America. And I thought it would be a great idea to jump on a podcast today to do a little bit of a warm-up for the election night itself, what to expect now when we head into Tuesday's election day here in the US. But BP3, we all know you, of course, as a very respected advisor in the iGaming industry and online sports betting industry over in the US, particularly on public and government affairs. But I was thinking maybe you want to give a little bit more of an introduction of your background into the political landscape in North America. You obviously have a family ties that leads with a long history.
Yeah, thank you, Pierre. It's an immense pleasure to be with you, and thank you for the invitation to join this podcast. I always enjoy your podcasts. I've known you now for the greater part of 4.5 years, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And your company is extraordinary. Your staff, your team, all your human resources. Next.io is just an incredible organization, and I'm proud to be a small part of it. So,
making me blush here, PP3. Thank you.
I grew up, Pierre, in New Jersey, from Paterson, New Jersey, the third largest city in New Jersey of about 175,000 people. And I grew up in a political family, although, I just lost my dad, who was a 30-year member of the U.S. Congress. And in his eulogy, I explained to people, my mom didn't marry a congressman. My mom married a teacher. They were married for 62 years. My dad brought me very early on in life into the political world. I used to go with him on the campaign trail, as we say in America, from the age of 6. And I just turned 60 years old on August 3rd of this year. Unfortunately, Dad was in the hospital, so I didn't have much of a birthday party. But my wife took me to Sicily in late September so we could go back and enjoy our roots. That was an extraordinary experience. I've always enjoyed Malta, but Sicily is my first time there. I've been to Italy dozens of times. So I went on to high school and college and got my Master of Public Administration from the Kennedy School and then on to law school. My dad wasn't a lawyer. His parents wanted him to be. My dad played baseball, both in the collegiate level, and he played for the Philadelphia Phillies in Double-A minor league baseball. So he wasn't a lawyer. But I was involved, Pierre, from undergraduate, master's, law school, beyond, in government and politics. I worked on many campaigns. Formally, Bill Clinton's campaign, Hillary Clinton's campaign, John Kerry's campaign, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden. I used to work before I joined my firm 29 years ago. I used to work for the governor of New Jersey. I was his chief counsel. Governor Florio, who was a mentor of mine, he served one term. And then I went on to Washington to work for a member of Congress. I was the chief of staff to a member of Congress. Then I joined my firm, Princeton Public Affairs Group, which you're familiar with, Pierre, which is the largest state contract lobbying firm. We also have a federal office that I never really did much with because I didn't want to be conflicting with Dad's agenda. And so, I'm immensely involved in politics and government affairs, and that's my core contribution, both to the industry and for the betterment of the country.
Brilliant, Bill. So, what are your expectations now? What is your interpretation of this election cycle this year? It's a couple of days till the election. It feels like the Trump supporters are convinced of a Trump win. Harris supporters are convinced for a Harris win. The better markets are saying one thing. The polls are saying a different thing. It feels like there isn't really any clarity of where this thing is going. What's your interpretation of where this election is heading?
Pierre, every election in my adult life, so for the past 40 plus years, every time we bump up against an election, there's anxiety, and everyone says on both sides of the political aisle, this is the most important election, right? I get that. I think for many reasons, this is a very unique event. I think this is an incredibly important election. But I want to say up front, because I think it's important, I like to try to be objective. You can bring your emotions and your subjectivity into things. But, Pierre, as I was sharing with you a few days ago, I was just in Montgomery, Alabama, at the invitation of Faulkner University to debate the morality of gambling. And one of the things that I was disappointed in is that they couldn't find anybody else in the industry to do this. I am a big proponent. Many people said, Bill, you're going into the lion's den, enemy territory. I don't view them as my enemies. I view them as having principles, which I respect, but I disagree with. I believe gambling's moral, and that was the premise I started on. I am a Catholic, so I'm Christian. They couldn't have been nicer, but it's a different world down there. Same country, but different world, different value systems. They're not big proponents of gambling. They're not big proponents of alcohol. So I want to say that this election, just a few days away, is important. But anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen, I think they're guessing more than they're really giving an objective opinion on. This election can go either way. I think that former President Donald Trump has made some mistakes in the last few days, including that Madison Square Garden event, which it was just, I don't know why he would have done it, why he would have allowed those insulting comments about Latinos and blacks and Jews. In the same regard, he continues to do that, yet the race is very close. Final point. It's important to understand because my clients in Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, in LATAM, in throughout Europe, and now I have a client on the African continent for the first time. They all don't understand what's going on, right? And I try to explain to them, we have free elections. I do believe our elections are fair. Some would disagree with that, but it's not based on any real data. You fact check it. We know that President Biden beat Donald Trump by 7+ million votes, and he won. Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump by just about 4 million votes, and she lost, okay? I think the difference that people outside America have to understand is two main things. We have in our Constitution the Electoral College. So every state has a collection of electoral votes. New Jersey, we have 13 members of Congress and 2 U.S. senators, so we have 15 electoral votes. Each state has 2 U.S. senators, and then they have a number of Congress people based upon population. You have to get to 270 to win the Electoral College. You can lose the popular vote like Trump did in 16 and win the Electoral College and you're president. I am hoping, first of all, regardless of the outcome, and I think it's way too close to call, either candidate can win. I think that the most important thing is whoever wins, the country has to come behind them and support them. And I hope we don't have another incident like we did 4 years ago on January 6th, because that was a terrible reflection of our country.
Right. And to that point, Bill, regardless of who the winner is next week, what's your expectation moving forward in this transition period? Because the feeling that I'm getting as an outsider is that Democrats feel that this is a consequential election and democracy is at stake. And likewise, the Republicans feel the same way. Right. And the feeling from an outsider is that America is becoming more and more and more polarized, and the two sides have a harder time to understand each other's political perspectives. So what's your expectation regardless of who is the winner in next week's election? Do you think we can potentially face another January 6th situation, or worse for that matter?
There's a couple of things that have happened this election cycle which I haven't seen in my lifetime. And I'll get into that. But I think it's important to set the contextual background. In 2020, so 24 years ago, when I was in my 30s, young like you, I was involved in Al Gore's election versus George Bush. And it all came down to that quote unquote hanging chads in Florida. Al Gore, who you may like or dislike, that's not what's important here, did the right thing. He conceded the election after taking it up to the Supreme Court, and he conceded and allowed George Bush to move on. One thing is important. Politics can never be above our country's interests. There's a point in time where, yeah, you may feel like, oh, I should have won this, or this happened or that happened, but you have to do something better and bigger, and you have to put country above your selfish personal interests and your political party's interests. Al Gore did that. George Bush went on to be president for 2 terms. 4 years later, he beat John Kerry in another relatively close election. But, you know, we've never seen this type of environment. January 6th, the insurrection movement. Whether you blame Trump or not, that's your opinion, and that's fine. I am very concerned because of a few things that happened recently. 1, 2 attempts to assassinate former President Trump, I think is despicable. I don't embrace that. I think that Donald Trump could have handled that better, and it would have allowed him to explode into a different realm. But he goes back to his basic misogynistic tendencies, which is not comfortable for a lot of people. Despite all that, he's still, in many people's view, the favorite. Kamala Harris, the vice president, has said at the outset she's the underdog. I know when I was in the hospital with my dad, Pierre, the 3rd week, and I believe it was July 21st, when I told my dad, who was failing in health, that Biden had dropped out, he was very disappointed. And then I told him later that day that Kamala Harris is running and she looks like she's going to get it. And he was happy about that. I think he was disappointed that Biden dropped out, but I think it was for the better. A lot of people think that was rigged. The fact of the matter is on June 27th in that debate, Biden did terrible. He did not acquit himself well, and many people were very nervous because had Biden stayed in, we could have had a massive different result. I think three things are for sure. I believe that the institutions of our government can provide for stability. They did 4 years ago after January 6th. We had a smooth, bloodless, for the most part, transition. Once we have a victor, a winner, I don't believe we're going to know the winner on election night, unless I'm reading things wrong. I think it may take a day or two. The most important state early on in terms of this election is the first battleground state that will close the polls. And we still won't know the result of Pennsylvania probably till the next morning, because they have to count in early voting and the mail-in ballots. But if there's any sense that Kamala Harris can't win Pennsylvania that night, essentially the race is over. We have 6 more states to look at: North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. And all those states are very tight. There are some polls that show Kamala winning in some of them, and some polls show Trump winning, but within the margin of error, which is less than 3 points. It's usually plus or minus 3 points in terms of polling. But remember, Pierre, in 2016, the polls were wrong. And in 2020, the polls were wrong. The outcome was different. So you can kind of throw the polls out now, because it's all about getting your voters to vote. And the more successful you are at doing that, both campaigns have plenty of resources. Both campaigns have good boots on the ground organizations. The other thing that people are going to be watching, not as interesting, but watching, is the outcome of the U.S. Senate and the Congress. I can sort of give you a prediction on the Senate. I think it's going to be very hard for the Democrats to win. I think the Republicans will probably win 51-49 or 52-48, the Senate. The House is extremely competitive. The Republicans only control the House by 4 votes. There's 4 seats in New York that are very competitive, that it looks like the Democrats can win. And then the question is, everywhere else, can they pick up a few seats here or there? We shall see.
So another point here is that our industry has somewhat taken center stage in this election cycle, with the better markets becoming a very strong guiding stick for where this election is heading. Poly markets first became very popular during this election cycle. Now Kalshi as well. And essentially there's nothing new about these betting markets. These have existed for a long time, right? But it's just that they have dressed these sites up in a way where the UX and UI experience is really akin to an official kind of polling site, essentially. And, in the last election cycle, I spoke to Matthew Shaddick, who is head of politics at Markets at that time, to interpret the election. And he told me that at that time, something like 80% of all betting volume in 2020 was put on a Trump win. And his interpretation of the polls and kind of trying to figure out how to place the odds on this on this situation was, he thought that it was something like 90%, that Biden was going to take the election. But since 80% of the liquidity was going to Trump, they obviously had to even out the odds somewhat, right? And there were a lot of nervous people within the industry that night, because if Trump would have won, this became the biggest betting activity of the entire year. And it would have meant that the industry as a whole would have lost an enormous amount of money, considering that there was so much liquidity going on Trump. Now, if we look at poly markets and Kalshi, something similar is happening, where most of the liquidity is again on Trump. And the odds for a Trump win on these betting markets is around 67%. So 2 out of 3 times, Kalshi and Polymarket are saying that Trump is going to win. In contrast to, for example, 538, Nate Silver, and those classical guys who are saying it's more like a coin flip. How do you interpret all of this, Bill? What's your thoughts around the betting markets versus the traditional polling? Do you take this serious? Do you think that perhaps these betting markets are manipulated in some way, as some people have suggested? What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thanks, Pierre. I want to start off by sharing with you a story. After I was working intensely for Isai Scheinberg, the founder of PokerStars, and for an organization called iMega to bring online casino and poker to America, and was lobbying successfully in multiple states, including my home state of New Jersey, and then starting the 10-year campaign to repeal PASPA and bring sports betting. I was hired by Aristocrat to approach Governor Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, about betting on politics. And the meeting was very brief. Aristocrat did their deck and explained that there's betting across the globe, except for America, legally on politics and other things like who the Pope's going to be or who's going to win the Academy Awards. And Governor Christie said, I don't like it. I don't want it. And so there was a pause then. I think it's important for two things to happen. I think America needs to embrace reality, because I know a neighbor of mine is going to bet on the election. And he's not going to bet on it legally, because you can't do it legally in New Jersey. So he's going to go into the black market, or he's going to go on the street, which is the same thing. It's so important to be able to advocate to the general political establishment in states and federally that this is happening anyway. We should be able to regulate it and legislate it so that we could have consumer protection, responsible gaming mechanisms, AML, etc. Number one. Number two, we can tax it. Number three, we can create legitimate jobs. But I don't believe that the betting markets are ever 100%. Certainly not in sport, but definitely not in politics. And interesting to share with you, I've been approached by 3 betting companies that want to bring me on board, not to get them licenses, which I normally do, or to advocate. They want me to help educate their bookmakers, because bookmaking on sport is very different than bookmaking on politics. You need a background, you need experience, you need to understand what to look at. So they're asking me if I'd be interested, and we're going to be talking after this election, where I could be advising their bookies on things to look for, right? I don't believe that the betting markets are bad or often wrong, but I do believe, and I don't believe that there's any shill, like somebody's like manipulating it, right? There's always going to be instances of that, but I wouldn't rely on the betting markets, nor would I rely on traditional political polling to create an expectation, right? You can sort of get all the data like you do in a stock market. You gather all the empirical data and you make a determination on who you want to support or invest in. I think this race is too close. I have heard arguments from both sides, because I have friends and colleagues on both sides of the aisle, where they see a Trump massive win, and they also see a Harris massive win. I think that's more based upon enthusiasm and excitement than it is based upon empirical data.
Makes perfect sense, BP3. So again, looking beyond this election, again, I want to go back to the polarization of the political landscape in the US. And going back 15 years, 16 years, the two sides are certainly a lot more combative than they used to be. And that seems to be the kind of central theme in the campaigns from both sides, even perhaps that smearing the other side seems to be the way to drive your campaign, so to say. And if you kind of like extrapolate that into the next coming years, how do you interpret like this polarization in the political landscape? How is anyone on either side ever going to unite the two political sides in the US? America obviously has a bloody history when it comes to polarization, civil war, and so on and so forth. How is it's possible to again get closer between the Democrats and the Republicans, or are we going to just see a continued polarization until we have more January 6th situations?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you. First and foremost, America is a relatively young country compared to many other countries, particularly in Europe. Number two, I remember my dad telling me, my dad enjoyed playing a friendly poker game. And his apartment in Washington, which I got for him, was right behind the Republican National Committee. My dad's a Democrat. So he could look out his apartment window and see the Republican National headquarters. He picked that apartment. I picked it for him because it was 2 blocks from his office on Capitol Hill. Every Thursday night, because traditionally Congress meets Monday afternoon to Friday morning so that people on the West Coast could get back to their homes on the weekends, right? And be with their constituents and their family. Dad used to have a poker game with 6 Republicans and 5 Democrats. They always, and maybe there was 1 or 2 others that joined. And they would talk about all kinds of things, but also talk about, hey, let's get something done. How can we work? My dad grew up in an era of working across the aisle. I know that in modern times, the last 3 to 5 years, my dad would tell me how disgusted he was because every time he talked to a member in the Republican Party, when he went back to his Democratic caucus, they would, argue with him or yell at him. Yell is probably not the right word, but criticize him for doing that. Nothing good happens when just one party has control and where just one party determines. That's why I really liked when Kamala Harris said a couple of weeks ago, when she did an event with Liz Cheney, the daughter of the Vice President Dick Cheney and the former Congresswoman from Utah, and they both agreed it's important, regardless of what happens, that we have a strong 2-party system. We've seen in the past when one president wins and the Congress goes that way, within 2 years, the voters backlash. There needs to be a healthy 2-party system. The other thing is, I don't like when people take things to extremes on both sides. I think that it's really bad when people try to argue that Trump's assassination was plotted by Biden or the government or Kamala Harris. I mean, that's ridiculous. There's no factual basis for that. There's also instances where the Democrats go extreme. You have to respect the other side. Don't compromise your principles, but find ways to work common ground. And let me give you an example of this. When I had that debate in Montgomery, Alabama last week, I knew I was in an audience of about 1,600 people who did not agree with me, okay? But what I said is, where are the days of leaders, politicians being able to build bridges, right? Bill Clinton was great at doing that. Obama attempted to do it, but wasn't able to do it. Bill Clinton worked with Newt Gingrich, welfare reform, 100,000 cops on the street, infrastructure. He did a lot of things working with the other side of the aisle. I am hopeful that whoever wins this election, and of course I'm rooting for Kamala Harris. I voted for her already. I'm hoping whoever wins, that people will take a step back and understand that there's more here than just screaming at somebody or disagreeing with somebody. Try to find ways to reach common ground to get things accomplished for the people.
And Bill, come election night, what should people look out for? You mentioned, of course, Pennsylvania is the first thing that people should pay very close attention to. That is one of the fiercest competitive battleground states at the moment. What else should we do to prepare ourselves for the election night?
There's a couple of things. I don't know that your audience would be extraordinarily interested in this, but should there be some? There's a congressional district in New Jersey, which is in South Jersey, Cape May in Atlantic County, that used to be held by a Democrat. When he won, he switched parties because Trump won in 16 in order to keep that seat. If that seat flips back to a Democrat, that's very telling because that's a very conservative part of New Jersey, and we'll know that very early on. His name is Congressman Van Drew. He was a Democrat in the state legislature for 2 decades. He won a seat, got reelected as a Democrat, and then flipped in 2018. And he's held that seat. There's some indications he's going to win pretty easily. So if he wins easily, that's not an indication. Then there's 4 seats in the lower part of New York, not in New York City, but in like Westchester County, that are held by Republicans that are very competitive seats. If those, we know that Kamala Harris is going to win the state of New York. That's not even a debate. But if those seats flip, then we know we're going to have a very interesting election night. 2, Pennsylvania, and we'll know the polls will close in Pennsylvania at 8 p.m. Eastern time, but they don't start counting the mail-in ballots until later in the evening. So we may not know the result of Pennsylvania till the morning unless there's a huge push from Philadelphia and Pittsburgh to give Kamala Harris like an overwhelming victory night. I don't see that happening. Once we determine what's going on in Pennsylvania or not, then you need to look at 2 other states which are also in the Eastern time zone, and that's North Carolina and Georgia. If Kamala Harris or Trump win both those states, we're in for a pretty interesting night. So I would look at those 2 states. And then moving to the Central time zone, Wisconsin and Michigan. Now, every indication is that Kamala Harris will win both those states. If she loses both those states, she's going to have a tough road, even though if she wins Pennsylvania. And then we go into the West Coast time zone, Nevada, where God bless Las Vegas is, and Arizona. And those states look very tight. Biden won both those states. Trump is up 1 or 2 points, even though it's within a margin of error. That's really where to look at this. I think, unless there's a blowout, and I don't expect there to be one, I think we'll probably know the outcome of the count by either Monday night or Thursday morning.
Monday night or Thursday morning.
I'm sorry, Wednesday night or Thursday morning.
Wednesday. Wednesday night. Wednesday.
Or Thursday morning. My apologies. I misspoke.
Right. Brilliant, PP3. It's going to be an absolute thriller here next week. Final question. What are you going to do during election night? What are you up to?
So permit me to just share, because I believe in sharing. I'm a better person now. My dad's made me a better person, particularly since his passing. Monday, I'm going to spend a majority of the day with my wife at my dad's district office, cleaning it out, right? Because he's got to be the office has to be out of there by the end of the year. And God bless America, because the person who replaced my dad in the state legislature when he went to Congress, an assemblywoman, now senator, woman, Puerto Rican, great person. She's going to replace him in Congress, and she's up on the ballot Tuesday. Tuesday, I'll be helping her, making phone calls, going to various polling precincts. And then Tuesday night, I'm going to probably be with the family watching the election returns, because I'd rather be home watching it than out in a public party, because if the outcome is not my liking, I'm not going to be in a good position to be in public. That's essentially what I'm doing. And then, as I told you, I'm very excited about Wednesday, separate from the election. I'm going to be having lunch in New York with a person who I find to be an extraordinary person and helped me in life, which is Isai Scheinberg, the founder of PokerStars and the creator of Peer Software, which is the platform. He's going to be in New York next week. and we're going to be getting together for the first time in many years.
Brilliant, BP3. I'm very excited to follow the election night as we go, and now we know a little bit more what to look out for during the night itself. Bill, thank you so much for coming aboard and sharing your wisdom, like always. Astute observations here on the political landscape in the US. I wish you all the best, and I'm looking forward to follow up. And I'll see you on the other side, whatever the other side is.
I'll see you in Malta in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you for having me, Pierre.